All of these people are really on the precipice of potentially getting wiped out from one little ruling from the FCC that 99% of them don't even know about.
Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Arbeit. I have an incredibly exciting guest here today. He hardly needs an introduction, and I'm sure you know him online as the Czar, but so excited to be welcoming Eric Troutman of Troutman Amin. Eric, thank you truly for coming here today. It's a pleasure speaking with you.
Absolutely, always a pleasure. I'm actually a big fan of your show, Caitlin. You always deliver really good stuff, so happy to be here.
Awesome, I appreciate it. Now, I know you're going to be attending the upcoming Contact.io show. You are going to be speaking there. Other people from your team are speaking there. I think you guys are sponsoring the stage as well. Super excited about that. But today, the topic that we have at hand is what businesses should be doing now to prepare for future changes coming up from the FCC. With that said, before we get into it, again, I think most of our audience is pretty familiar with you, pretty familiar with what you guys do over there. But can you just kick us off before we get into the topic, your area of specialty and a little bit of background on yourself?
Yeah, sure. So I'm Eric Troutman. I'm known as the Czar of the TCPA. I'm a partner and founder here at Troutman Amin LP. And for the last 15 years, I've literally done nothing but TCPA. I don't know why I did this with my career, but honestly, I love it. And so I've been lead counsel in over 500 nationwide class actions and handled thousands of individual suits. And we help people with compliance and we help people to understand the law. And more recently, of course, I'm now the president of REACH, which is an organization trying to help lead buyers and marketers to really set good standards, but also to push back on some of the really overbearing governmental regulation that we're going to be talking about here today.
Awesome. As a fellow TCPA nerd myself, I think it's super cool, and I'm sure our audience is super excited to hear your perspective on this topic. So I was hoping maybe you could just remind us and our viewers what the FCC's role really should be in terms of regulating businesses, call centers, debt collection agencies, things like that, and maybe what that relationship they've had and what their role has been over the last couple of years.
Yeah, so the FCC, that's the Federal Communications Commission, they are actually the agency in the United States of America charged with assuring, ironically, that communications are effective here in this country. I say it's ironic because they've, over the course of the last 5 years, made it really hard to communicate with people over cell phones. They are, of course, responsible for the expansion of the TCPA because they interpret the statute and their word is gospel when it comes to what the TCPA means. The courts have to apply it. And so we've seen the FCC expand the TCPA a few times. More recently, we've seen the FCC give the carriers tremendous blocking and tremendous labeling capabilities, which in my opinion are very likely unconstitutional and unenforceable, but hey, they're doing it anyway. At the highest of levels, the FCC is the agency that has all the power when it comes to how you can communicate with the consumer.
One of the things I was curious about is I've only been in the industry for 5 years now, so I haven't had a ton of background in this, but we're coming up on an election year. I can't believe it's already back to that time again, but coming into a season like that for the FCC, is this a time where we typically see them becoming more stringent on how they're cracking down on businesses? Is this a time where maybe things are going to become a little more lenient? Is it just something that we have to wait and see? What are your thoughts coming into the next year and what businesses should expect?
We know definitively that the FCC is looking at making some major changes to the TCPA. That's what we're going to be talking about here in a second with their notice of proposed rulemaking. More broadly, though, you do actually see the commission become more active during the end of an election cycle, I guess I should say. So, for instance, we've got the Biden administration in charge right now. Biden was very slow to appoint a fifth commissioner to the FCC. In fact, we still don't have a fifth commissioner installed even on this late date. And so that's really slowed down the commission. But we expect, and we have seen in past administrations, that the last year to 6 months of administration, you start to see the commission really start leaning more politically toward whatever side, the R or the D, that they're leaning toward. Right now, of course, they're a Democratic-led institution. So I would expect to see a lot more activity. That's not surprising. Again, we've already seen 2 NPRMs this year that are currently pending. One of them, the big, huge lead gen NPRM that we're going to talk about here in a second, and then the other one, the revocation NPRM. But without question, I think we can expect to see the commission be quite active here in the next 18 months.
Interesting. I guess we'll just dive into it. For those proposed rulemaking that we're seeing coming up right now, can you kind of just talk us through what's coming down the pipes and what businesses should be expecting?
Yeah, so there's 2 of them. One of them is a real doozy. The other one, maybe not that big of a deal. So I'll take the doozy first. Those of you, and I'm not sure kind of, Caitlin, if you folks work with marketers, primarily servicers, debt collectors, but this is really squarely to the marketing universe. If you are buying leads, right, and then using an outreach mechanism like a phone call, right, voice channel, pre-recorded calls, text messages, or SMS, you're going to be very impacted by the FCC's ruling. Right now, the FCC has been asked by very powerful forces, the Public Knowledge, which is a group that the Biden administration is very close with, NCLC, which is a very powerful consumer group, as well as 28 attorneys general and 12 Democratic senators have all come forward and asked the FCC to say it is illegal to sell leads. If you are creating a website, you're a publisher, you're brokering, you have data from a consumer that went online and said, I am interested in hearing from lenders. And even if that disclosure has the lenders listed, even if it's a one-to-one, there's only a single lender there, and then you try to sell that lead, right? It's what people do in this industry, to a marketer who's interested in reaching out to that consumer because they can provide that lending service, that service, whatever it is. These folks, this huge group of people have now asked the FCC to say that that activity is illegal. So what does that mean? It means obviously that if you're buying leads, you might not be able to do that safely anymore. The FCC comes down in response to this NPRM proceeding and decides, you know what? You cannot transfer consent. It's illegal to do so. Then folks can no longer buy a lead and rely on that third-party lead to make an outbound call. And of course, millions of leads are sold every single day. Millions of phone calls are made in reliance on those leads. So it would be a really big change, very dramatic impact on a huge number of businesses. And obviously, we at TCPAworld.com are paying very close attention to this. Now, I should say that's not the only outcome that's possible here. The NPRM is offering a waterfall of options. Of course, at the top is the worst case scenario that I just gave you, which is that you cannot transfer consent at all. You can only generate essentially first-party leads. If you're picking on my good client loanDepot, if you're loanDepot, you can only generate leads on loandepot.com, and then only loanDepot can call on the lead from loandepot.com. You could not, for instance, buy a lead from LendingTree anymore. So big dramatic change. Of course, if this comes to fruition, there's going to be a big paradigm shift in the industry. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But the FCC might not do that. That's what everyone's pressuring the FCC to do. It might not do that. It might do something less. For instance, one thing it's considering also is saying that consent has to be provided on a one-to-one basis. So you could still sell or transfer consent, but you could only do it on behalf of one potential lead buyer. Another alternative is, you know what, we'll say more than one, but we're going to limit it to, say, 5 or 10. That's also an option. We don't know exactly where that's going to land, but the commission's also considering that. Another option is, you know what, we're not going to limit the number of partners, but we're going to say that you can't use hyperlinks anymore, and you have to put all the partners that might be able to buy that lead right there in the disclosure for that consumer to see, plain black and white, simple. And then the last thing it's also considering is saying you can no longer have a multi-vertical consent. So if you go onto a website about insurance, you can only offer the consumer an insurance offer. You couldn't offer the consumer a lending offer or use fine print to capture consent for, say, a solar offer. So those are all the possibilities right now that are in front of the commission. No one knows for sure what the FCC is going to do. In fact, I'll bet not even the FCC knows what it's going to do just yet. But I think given the amount of pressure on the commission to act, we're going to definitely see some activity here. And if I were a betting man, and I suppose I am, I would expect to see something near the top, right? Something very aggressive from this commission that, again, is led by Chairwoman Jessica Rosenworcel. Again, she's a Democrat, and she's known to be quote-unquote consumer-friendly, which doesn't necessarily translate into consumer-friendly policies, but certainly in this instance might translate into an anti-business policy. So we've got to watch out.
Yeah, hearing you talk through that, I can't imagine for all the businesses out there what an impact that could have. And I know you asked who we typically work with. We're typically more on the debt collection side. And the thing that it makes me think about is what we feel when our clients are reaching out, or at least trying to reach out via text. I know that you touched on spam labels at some point, and at least what we've seen is that in the debt collection industry, even if maybe they're allowed legally to reach out to clients, we're seeing a lot of barriers put in place for them, maybe being able to get onboarded to texting, for their calls being labeled as spam, a variety of different things that are becoming these barriers. If we see that be passed in a really aggressive way, do you expect that path for businesses to look more litigation? Do you expect it to be more on the side of them maybe not being able to get approved by communication providers in the text and calling space? What do you think might happen if we see that really aggressive ruling there?
There's a lot of potential fallout here. Obviously, with the FCC potentially poised to rule in the context of express consent and whether or not it can be transferred, that's going to open up a huge new avenue for lawsuits. Litigation is your primary risk here, but you are right. carriers are already blocking and labeling at a fantastic rate without really any standards, without any oversight. They're doing it mostly on a post hoc or just made up basis. You talk to them today, they'll tell you one thing. You talk to them tomorrow, they'll tell you something else. It's really quite terrible. And I know a number of my clients are thinking about suing. There's actually right now a different petition from the FCC brought by a company called Numerical that's asking the commission to take a look at the call labeling in particular, because these companies, of course, are labeling you. They're over labeling. It's basically defamation is what it is. And then they turn around and say, hey, if you want us to stop labeling you, no problem. Pay us a little bit of money for our white label process, for our branded caller ID service, and for remediation. It's just disgusting. It's like the old protection money schemes by the mafia. So you got a nice business. It would be a shame if something were to happen to it. So why don't you pay us a little bit to make sure it doesn't? That's pretty much what they're up to. But for your listeners, actually pivoting then to the second NPRM that's pending, that actually might be more important for you. And this one looks at revocation of consent. And we know, for instance, under the FDCPA, your revocation, your request not to be contacted has to be in writing. But under the TCPA, that is not the case. Hopefully you all know that. Under the TCPA, currently the law is either you have a contract that dictates how revocation can take place, or in the absence of a binding contractual term on that point, the consumer can revoke their consent in any reasonable means. And of course, that means just using clear language when they're on the phone with one of your agents. The FCC is right now in an NPRM looking to put some more contours around that. One of the big things that they're asking is actually to limit revocation, to require it to be done within a 24-hour period. Now, hopefully many of your listeners are thinking, we can do it in 24 hours, and that's great. But for many folks, actually 24 hours is very challenging for a number of reasons. My organization, REACH, which is Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment, a really good trade organization that's looking to set some standards. We've reached out to the commission and said, look, 24 hours is too tight. Let's give them 10 business days, right? A reasonable period of time so that folks have some time to work with. So that proceeding is also ongoing. We've got to keep a real close eye on this. The commission is likely to come out now and codify the rule, again, that consumers can revoke consent in any reasonable means. There's a good chance that they're going to preserve the right to contractually dictate how revocation takes place. But you've got to pay attention here, because it's possible, again, with this commission, with this chairwoman, that the FC does something unexpected. Say, you know what, you can no longer have a single point of revocation. You can no longer dictate to the consumer by contract how that revocation has to take place. And now, for instance, you have to honor any reasonable needs, whether you have a contract or not. So that is something to keep an eye on. Obviously on tcpaworld.com, we'll let you know as soon as it breaks, and I'll shoot it over to you, Caitlin, so you can let your people know as well.
Awesome. Yeah, hearing you talk through that, like a 24-hour time frame to respond to something like that, at a first glance, it might sound like it's reasonable, we can keep up with it, but organizations at scale, or even, I always think about the small business out there who you already, again, you have so much on your plate, I can see how that becomes a major burden. From your clients that you're working with, I guess we'll stick on the topic of this revocation first. Are you seeing people preemptively implement anything in their businesses to prepare for this and get ready if this does pass and go forward and we need to have that process happen in a 24-hour turnaround time?
Yeah, the truth is, yes. So again, I've got a very broad group of clients. Many of them are marketers, many of them are platform carriers, but also some servicers and some collectors. But across the board, people are looking at how do we implement now and prepare for a 24-hour regime, especially where you've got BPOs or you've got call centers or third-party operations to keep in mind. You definitely have to have that hub and spoke model where you've got the feedback loop where individuals and third-party agencies are reporting back to you, hey, this DNC just came in, and that you then, as the seller or as the collector or as the creditor, depending on what the circumstances are, that you now have the ability to then percolate that information back to your web of callers so that within 24 hours, you have received the information, right? And then you have redisseminated it, and everybody has now processed that all within a 24-hour window. Again, when you've got perfectly good visibility and good processes, it's not impossible. And I've got a number of clients that think that they can do it in 24 hours. But I've got other clients where we're working with X party, but X party is also subbing with Y, Z, A, and this is happening in multiple places. And the feedback loop is not quite immediate. Maybe it takes us 12 hours overnight to get a DNC from so-and-so because that's the batch process. Then we have to process it, and we have to disseminate it. Then they have to batch it back up. Then they have to pass on to their sub who has to batch it. And you're starting to look at 5, 6, 7 business days. even working as quickly as you reasonably can with a decent process. And so that's why we're looking at the 10 business day rule. But everybody really should be thinking, how can I condense this? How can I streamline this? Can we develop additional visibility if you are sitting at the center of that hub to understand exactly who's downstream, who's making phone calls for you? If you're a debtor, you need to have, if you're assigning, sorry, not a debtor, a creditor, and you're assigning a debt to a collector, are you doing that exclusively, or are you allowing multiple collectors to work a debt at the same time? If it's the latter, you've really got to think about how you're coordinating these DNCs. So there's a lot of things to think about, but without question, I think smart businesses are right now starting to look at how do we absorb revocations through multiple channels? How do we disseminate those revocations, and how do we process them within a 24-hour period? Because there's a very good likelihood that you're going to be looking at a rule like that.
Yeah, hearing you talk through all those moving pieces, where all these channels have to coordinate, and it totally makes sense of why, you're going to need more than 24 hours in a lot of people's situations. For those people who are listening right now and they're thinking to themselves, I can't live in a world where this 24-hour law goes through. I know that you mentioned REACH, something that you're involved with. Are there maybe organizations, are there ways that advocacy groups that people who are listening can maybe get involved with to try and, I guess, maybe persuade or try and work on this effort to get that time period extended out?
Yeah, it's a really important time right now for both of these NPRMs. Right now, we record this, it's late August, that's the summer. Usually DC kind of shuts down, but say September, October, a lot of lobbying efforts need to take place. We really need to get in the ear of the commissioners and their staff to help them to understand the impact that these rulings might have on businesses. So if you're listening to this and you think, man, I want to participate, what can I do? Well, you've got a number of options. One is you as a business can, in your own name, comment or go into what's called ex parte to talk to the commissioners, talk to their staff. You've got a right to be heard as an American on these topics, right? And then submit an ex parte documentation in terms of what you talked about. This can be very powerful. These commissioners love to hear, and their staff loves to hear from real businesses, like real people, because this is how they learn. You'd be surprised. Most of the people in government, actually, maybe you wouldn't be surprised, have no idea how to run a business. They've never done it before. They don't actually have much information about how a call center works, how a debt collector works. They just have these ideas, a lot of which they've seen from movies or they've heard third party. But really hearing from people on the ground is actually very valuable and can really help the commission to understand where you're coming from. But if you don't want to do it in your own name, and most people don't, even though they should, they don't, there are those of you in the debt collection community, you are very lucky because you have ACA International to represent you. It's a very strong, very proud organization that has been very effective from a policymaking standpoint. Reach out to your ACA rep and just say, hey, look, I heard Troutman talking about this revocation thing. ACA has already submitted a comment. Again, they do good work over there, but push them, right? You can always push them a little harder. Those of you who are looking for another organization, right? You want to push even harder. Again, keep REACH in mind. Now, REACH is primarily a marketing side organization. It's an organization of direct-to-consumer marketers and sellers. But it is very deadly focused right now on pushing back on some of this overreach that we're seeing from the commission, because really, especially in the lead gen space, but also in this revocation, the commission is not really, I think, looking at all of the different pieces, all of the different ramifications of a potential ruling. And REACH is really trying to do its best to make sure the industry's voice is heard, maybe from a different avenue. We tend to be very legal. We tend to be I'm the president of the organization. An attorney is the president. So as you can imagine, our content and our comments is really kind of looking at what is the authority of the commission? What are the limitations of that authority? What are the rulings that exist today? We really try to hit back from a legal perspective, but also it's infused, if you look at some of the comments, right, with this factual background, the depth and the history and the knowledge that the board members bring with literally decades, if not centuries, of combined experience in the call center space, all of which, of course, is very valuable. But we need more members, right? We need more ammunition. We need more friends to help us to be informed and empowered to take our message and make it even more amplified to the commission.
Yeah, I think one of the important things that you really touched on there is getting these small businesses in front of lawmakers and helping them understand that the debt collection agencies or the call centers out there, they're not always what you see in the movies. They're not, the bad rap that they got. I can say myself, working in the industry for 5 years, I've met so many just incredible individuals that are such kind people. And I think that side of the industry doesn't always get out there. You had touched on this earlier in there, and we'll leave this as one of our final thoughts. But you talked about sometimes these laws get passed and they're in the effort to be consumer friendly, but they're not always consumer friendly. With that said, I certainly can think of when we think about spam labels, but are there any other laws that got passed in an effort to be consumer friendly that are maybe really hurting consumers right now that need to be rethought?
Well, I mean, look, we know that anytime there's restrictions put on the debt collection apparatus and industry, it impacts the credit facilities in this country. That impacts consumers, right? If you don't let debt get collected, then that's going to increase the cost of capital that consumers want and need. And that, of course, damages the entire economy. This entire thing works as a balance, right? There can only be credit if consumers pay it back so that it can then be used not just for profit for the creditor, but also to make new loans, right? This is how the process works. So every time there's a break, anytime there's difficulty that's put on the collection process, of course, that actually hurts the available credit for the entire American economy, which of course hurts everybody. But as we pivot over and we look at what the FCC is doing in that first NPRM regarding lead generation, really lead generation, people might think, what does that mean? Think of it in terms of consumer comparison shopping websites, the lending trees of the world, even the Zillows of the world, right? Websites that provide really cool enhanced data services and information to consumers in exchange essentially for getting to know which consumers are interested in what products or services, and then providing that data to a third party who might contact that consumer. One of the superpowers of our country is that if you go online right now and Google anything in the world, you're going to get a bunch of really insightful, free, informative content, all of which is essentially driven by this phenomenon of lead generation that the FCC is essentially about to shut down. So it's massively important, of course, for the lead generators themselves, the performance marketers, the people that are generating these intent signals. It's massively important for people who rely on it, right? Not just big companies like loanDepot that might buy a lead to try to contact somebody that wants to buy a mortgage, but also for the small mom and pops, right? The local Allstate agent in Rochester, New York, who can't afford to have a billboard and has to spend $5 to try to find a lead of somebody that's interested in their product in their area. All of these people are really on the precipice of potentially getting wiped out from one little ruling from the FCC that 99% of them don't even know about. And of course, that's what I try to do, is bring that empowerment, that knowledge, and that information to the marketplace so that people can help to actually get with the lawmakers and help the lawmakers to understand what's really going on the ground so that good decisions get made as opposed to bad ones.
Awesome. We definitely appreciate all the stuff that you do in the industry. And even just today, it's been a wealth of knowledge. I guess final thoughts that we'll leave with today for that little Allstate agent in Rochester, New York, to keep with your example. What is one thing or a main takeaway that they should be doing today to stay afloat, to stay in business, and to maybe do what they can to try and prevent these things from negatively impacting them?
I'll tell you, their pivot is more challenging than others. From my perspective, when I talk to folks about being ready and being a smart business, I'm talking about the folks that are in the lead generation industry right now and those who are lead buyers, right? Thinking about the future being drive to site campaigns, less reliance on data leads, less reliance on warm transfers, heavier owned and operated, but having the brand own and operate that is actually the one that's communicating with consumers. And if you are reliant on buying leads, you've got to start thinking about petitioning if you're a captive, petitioning Allstate, petitioning whoever it is that's the enterprise, saying, look, we're going to need leads now directly from you because we're not going to be able to buy these third party anymore. It's a really big issue. And as we already told you, those of you that are in the debt collection space, being prepared for that second revocation NPRM that's also out there, making sure you're building your processes, developing your visibility in terms of what your call center operations look like so that you will be ready either for a 24-hour turnaround, 3-day period, 5-day period, and also to be nimble when it comes to needed training, because if, for instance, you lose your right to have contractual revocation, you're going to have to fall back on good agent training to be able to capture those DNCs and make sure that they're being processed appropriately.
Fantastic. Again, Eric, I appreciate you more than I can express for going through all of this. It has been super helpful for me. I'm sure it's been helpful for the audience. For anyone who's listening who either wants to get involved, who possibly wants to look into services with you guys, where can they find you online?
I'm pretty easy to find. Google TCPA and Czar and you find me, but tcpaworld.com is officially the website. And Troutman Amin, AMIN.com, is the powerful website of Troutman Amin LLP.
Awesome. It has been a pleasure. And with that said, thank you guys all for watching. That has been our episode of Arbeit.